This is Boston University's Neurophotonics podcast. My name is Sung An, a second-year PhD candidate in biomedical engineering, and I am the producer, editor, and co-host of this specific episode of the podcast. This episode, our aware hosts are joined by the co-founder and co-presidents of the Neurophotonics Center's Neuroethics group as they explain what neuroethics is, why they founded this group, the common ethics challenges that pop up during brain research, and how thinking about these problems can have real impact on the future of science. So, thank you for tuning in, and please enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Neurophotonics podcast, created by trainees at the Neurophotonics Center and produced here at Boston University. My name is Sung An. I'm a second-year PhD candidate in biomedical engineering. I'm usually behind the camera as the producer, but I'm here today on camera for the first time. I'm here today with my co-host,
Sunil Duwari. I'm third-year biomedical engineering PhD candidate.
Today we are here with the co-founders and current co-presidents of Boston University's Neuroethics Organization, a student-led organization with the mission of exploring the wide array of ethical issues across neuroscience and biomedical engineering. Nicholas Cicero is a fourth-year PhD student in Dr. Laura Lewis's lab. His research combines non-invasive human brain imaging techniques such as EEG and fMRI to investigate how regions deep in the brain regulate sleep-wake states and block the processing of sensory information when we are in a sleep state. And Leo Steiner is a fourth-year PhD student in Dr. Shu Han's lab, where he studies the impact of Parkinson's disease on stepping and gait in marine models, and how deep brain stimulation of the subthalamic nucleus can be improved specifically to reduce gait symptoms. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Yeah. While we can dive into your individual research if the conversation should go that way, the main theme for today's episode will be about neuroethics. So could you tell us a little bit more about what neuroethics is and how it is relevant to researchers studying the brain?
Sure. Yeah. So our neuroethics group kind of started with the idea of exploring the various ethical issues that kind of are posed across neuroscience and biology. It's a pretty wide array of topics that range from like BCI to drugs and human subject research. There's a lot of different things that are covered by this umbrella of topics. And then in terms of how it relates to my research, that's the second question, right?
Yeah.
For my research, I think since I'm doing human subjects research, there's a lot of consideration of how to make the studies we do include diverse populations and also considering like the safety of our subjects when we do the research. I'd say that, the biggest thing is really trying to ensure that everyone that we're studying kind of represents the population in general, from sex to race to various life experiences and all that. That's really, I think, the biggest part that relates to my research.
Yeah, definitely. And when we started the neuroethics group, it just kind of built off the fact that we were all fascinated by new neurotechnology, and there's so much of that today. So I guess my research, I'm using novel probes to investigate different things in the brain. And so we realized that like with these new technologies, there are so many considerations beyond the engineering principles that go into the design and how patients interact with them. Yeah.
That's great. So following up on the same thread, would you want to expand on some of the challenges in neuroethics, specifically in neurophotonics or neurotech?
Yeah, sure. So one concept we talk about a lot in the BCI world is explanting the device and removing the device in terms of if the device fails or if there's a clinical endpoint for the device. And so we've had a number of speakers discuss the ethical problems with that because in many cases, patients are going into clinical trials and they're receiving devices or technologies that help their disease or have the possibility of helping resolve symptoms or prevent further onset of the disease. But these devices are not always built to be chronic devices. And so there's a huge risk of infection when you're removing these invasive devices. There's a risk of the patients wanting the device after the endpoint has been achieved. And funds aren't infinite. And so a lot of times patients aren't able to receive the treatments that they want long term. So that's one problem that we kind of dive into.
That's really interesting. So going off on the clinical trials, I've also heard that, let's say you have a device that's supposedly cures some disease, and having to go off on your point, having that representative population is very important in that aspect as well, because what groups are you going to let the clinical trials happen? And if the clinical trial is successful, or if the device actually benefits the participants, then just including one type of participant might not be the best. And also in the opposite direction, if the device does a little bit of harm, then just picking a set of population and picking just that population to bear that harm might also fall under the neuroethics topic. If anybody wants to expand on that, or if you have more thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think across the various speakers that we've had come in, the common thread is thinking about kind of the experiences and people that these various devices are aimed towards. So for example, we had a company come and speak to us about a non-invasive device for depression use. Actually, one of the speakers for that was one of the patients that actually used this device. And one thing he talked about was kind of the actual using this device in real life, and how the patients that receive this, like how do they actually experience wearing this device, with various considerations for like head size, or like does it actually match what their images they want to present to the outside world, in terms of like, do they want to wear this device and have it be obvious to people that they have this device? And that's just one example, but creating these devices for people that are actually going to use it, you have to really think about the non-scientific parts that go into making sure people are really using this, making sure it kind of matches with their lifestyle, and ultimately like setting them up to really get the most out of this device. I think not as like novel as BCI stuff, but EEG has always kind of had this issue of how do you use EEG with people that have hair that doesn't actually kind of mesh with these scalp electrodes. So yeah, thinking about how do you make your technology fit with these non-scientific considerations is really, I think, important, especially to make sure that your device or treatment can really, span everyone's potential use cases.
Yeah, and another really interesting case we had was we had a speaker, Dr. Dominic Sisti, come by, and he talked about psychedelics and the ethics of psychedelics. And a really interesting problem he brought up was that many of the clinical trials for psychedelics are for veterans, almost exclusively for veterans and for PTSD. And so when you're reviewing that research, you have to understand that the patient population was such a subset, pretty much. I mean, he was basically saying white men veterans. And so you're really, it's just a subset of the patient population. And so you can't fully extract those results into the full population without some greater detail.
And I actually, to go back to your point about like having a treatment only, or some device only be used for like a certain group. A lot of these, devices and whatnot, they're very expensive. Even the ones that I'm maybe thinking more of like drug treatments that are out there, but they're very expensive. So you can imagine in practice, only rich people are the ones that actually have access to this, or only, communities that have these really amazing institutions that have access to this can get this treatment. So I think as various treatments become more widespread in the population, you need to think about how do we actually get this to everyone, and not just these rich people that can afford it, but actually like others that really need this, but actually can't get the resources to have this actually improve their life.
Where do we come into being able to do that?
Like as PhD students?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the money part is tough, because that has a lot of other factors maybe outside of our control. But I think kind of the question of like making sure your science is diverse kind of starts with the basic science, where you're doing these like proof of concept studies, and really making sure that these samples that are going into these like initial studies really span that population. So like in our lab, we really try to make sure we have, people in both sexes, people across different races, across like SES and everything. Like we really try our best to have a wide representation in our studies. And I think that's within our control to do, to make sure that, when I'm sending out emails to subjects, I'm trying not to just, only choose one population. Yeah.
Yeah. And like with this organization, we really try to push for all of us to improve our skills of discussion and asking the right questions. I know a lot of us benefit from these discussions greatly because we would never have thought of an issue that someone brings up, and it really just expands our knowledge of the issues and our understanding of them so that we can apply it to our own research.
Yeah, so there's a big component of being aware and open to these different issues that may come up, especially when we're going into neuroscience research. I guess we have been talking more about human neuroscience research, but neuroethics doesn't limit itself to just human subjects. It also goes beyond that to, well, you mentioned basic science, but a part of that would be the animal studies that we would be taking part in. How does it apply differently or similarly?
Yeah, so I can take a stab at that first. My research is involving mice, so I use mice pretty much daily to investigate, the effects of Parkinson's disease on the brain. And I think when it comes to animal models in general, we try to think about what we can get from them and what we can't get from them, right? So we try to use the animal model to the best ability. We try to answer questions that are complex enough that we need to have an animal, but not too complex that we're abstracting from something that is not similar to the human brain. And so the way we like to think about animal models is just helpful tools that can lead towards clinical trials. We're not trying to, not necessarily, but at least personally, I'm not trying to understand the mouse brain and that's the end goal, right? I still want to be improving the human condition. So we try to build off what we understand from the mouse brain and then eventually apply it to the human brain.
Okay, that's great. So one more question on the neurotechnology side, because that's where I'm very much involved and interested in. So neurotechnology is everywhere these days, and brain-computer interfaces, it's the new hot or buzzword these days. So specifically to brain-computer interfaces, what are your perspective from the ethical standpoint? What challenges do you see in BCI? It could be from data privacy or implantation itself. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as someone that's not directly doing BCI research, I think my perspective is that it seems to have amazing potential to really help people. We're seeing that with, I don't know if DBS, deep brain stimulation, is considered BCI exactly, but I guess these more, both invasive and non-invasive ways of modulating brain activity. There's huge potential, and we've already seen really great impacts of it. I think my biggest worry is it seems like things are moving very quick on the science end, but we don't really have equal movement on the regulatory side of it. You kind of brought up data privacy, and I think there's a lot of just concerns of what happens if a company goes under, what happens with that data, who is actually regulating the use of this device and making sure it truly is safe for people. I guess, how do you safely explant it if that's what happens? I think you could probably give a more informative response, but I think from my outside perspective, it just seems like the science is moving so quick, but the important regulatory stuff is really not there, which I think can be scary, because I think that's how you get instances of subjects being kind of abused and not really informed about what's going on to their brain or body.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the regulatory stuff is super worrisome that it's not advancing as fast. Another thing I'm worried about is just that the technology is advancing way faster than the neuroscience, because we seem to be trying to, build the next greatest thing without an understanding of core principles of the brain. And a lot of times you can more easily deceive the public when you have really fancy technology rather than a really fancy solution or a really nice neuroscience solution to some of these neurodegenerative diseases or what have you. So I'm really worried that we're going to continue advancing with our technology without a lot of the backing of science. And I think it's really critical for us moving forward to be continually pushing for better science and funding a lot of the neuroscience programs.
Yeah, that makes you just like think of the fact that like being in this neuroscience space, I feel like in grad school I've really realized how little we know about the brain, and it's like it's cool that we're doing all these two cool technologies to impact people, but I feel like most of the things we like the techniques and things we use we don't really understand, and it's could be a bit worrisome to be pushing technology so fast without having like an understanding of what's really happening. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I mean, right now in the news and online medias, we see like, human telepathy or whatever is going to be possible in the next couple of years. But being in neuroscience research for this long, we know that that's scientifically not possible right now. So it's definitely not possible no matter how good of technology and engineers you have, because the science is lacking. Do you think that would also fall under some sort of neuroethics umbrella, like trying to overpromise the public that this thing is going to be realized very soon, even though there is scientific backing, because that is essentially a lot of the tax dollar money is going into funding that kind of projects, and a lot of the private funding is also at stake if false information or false promises are made.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that falls under kind of the ethical principles of like justice and beneficence. So, right, you want to be serving the greatest number of people and doing it in an equal and just way. You also don't want to be doing something that's not going to be solving the problem, right? If you're going down a rabbit hole that's not going to eventually solve a problem, there's a lot of waste there. So those issues come up all the time with the speakers that we bring in. And so we just want to be educating the public, educating ourselves, and asking the right questions.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on also just the general point of science communication, and I think that falls under neuroethics too. Of as scientists, we have a responsibility to not only do good science, but like communicate it in a way that is not promising too much or saying too much to people that don't know the details that we're doing. I think that's especially in our like today's day where news is not always trustworthy. I think as scientists, like it's our responsibility to make sure that what we're publishing and saying is very trustworthy. Like science, really, you can have a right and wrong with science. So I think sometimes scientists are at fault in making things a bit too complicated and hard to understand. So I think there are a lot of ethical principles under that of how do we as scientists make sure the science we do is both communicated clearly and understandably to everyone, but also still like faithful to the truth of what's happening.
In that respect, would you say that there is a bit of a difference between academia and industry in terms of how they communicate science? Because you mentioned something like being deceptive sometimes with the technology that we promise. How would we tackle that kind of issue?
Yeah, I think like the big differences between academia and industry is just where their funding sources are coming from most of the time. And so a lot of the communication is dependent on that, right? So if you're in academia and you're receiving grants from federal sources or even private sources, you're generally talking about 5-year programs. A lot of times they're 5-year grants. And so your communication doesn't have to be that extensive. It can be as simple as updates. You're also fundraising for the future constantly. You're getting data and then fundraising on that data. And so you're always fundraising ahead of your data. Whereas with industry, it's so quick. A lot of times it's year by year, you're updating your funding. And also you just want to show strength a lot of times in industry. And so you're telling your shareholders that things are going great. You're trying to always have growth. Whereas in academia, a lot of times things fail. A lot of times we're investigating projects with negative outcomes. And so, those differences are really important. And it's certainly the case that it has an impact on the progression of neurotech for sure.
Yeah. And I assume that also impacts what we were talking about before in terms of regulatory practices and how much regulation there is versus the pacing of the technology that is being advanced. If you are a company and you need to be communicating with your shareholders constantly, then you want that technology to be advancing faster than regulation can keep up with. Is there anything we can do about that?
Good question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's something to be said about like trying to get academia and industry more on the same page of like the goals of our research. And maybe part of that is like being more in sync on these regulatory practices and like these funding structures that more align like the parallel progress of science across industry and academia. Yeah, I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but I guess I wish there was more kind of crosstalk between the two, because at the end of the day, like we're trying to answer similar questions, we're doing similar research, but I guess the regulatory structures and funding structures might make those a bit more separate than they should be. Yeah, I'm not sure that really answers your question, but that's all I could think of.
No, I agree. I think the collaboration between the two is really important because you can get the best of both worlds when you're maybe putting riskier projects into academia and putting more fleshed out projects into industry with that require more money. Yeah, I think the collaboration between the two is really important, like you said.
And on the ethics side, I think I agree a lot on scientific communication. If the public is aware of where the technology is and what's possible and what's not, then stakeholders are generally from the public. So if they are also aware, then the chance of deception also goes down because general public knows what's possible, what's not, what's ethical, what's not.
Yeah.
So we can at least hope that the general public will not push the industry to like go beyond regulatory guidelines to push the technology just for its sake.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the BU's Neuroethics Organization under Neurophotonics Center. You both are leading the Neuroethics Organization. Would you like to say more about that? How you get the guest speakers to come to BU and talk about it and more?
Sure. You want to take this?
Yeah, sure. So, when we first started this organization, we were just generally passionate about neuroethics. We kind of wanted to have more discussion. We just wanted to learn more. And so it kind of just spawned from curiosity. And so we just decided to start inviting speakers from across the country virtually to come and talk to us about various topics that we were interested in. And so we started off just kind of emailing our old professors from old universities, maybe courses that we've taken in undergrad, connections that we had, just people that we were interested in hearing more from, specifically about neuroethics topics. And then what it grew into is a monthly series where we've been reaching out to people based on a topic that we're interested in to come and speak with us for about an hour. We ask them questions and they, have a casual discussion with us about whatever's on our mind, whatever's on their mind. So it's been really great.
Yeah. I think kind of adding on to that, another big motivation was also to bring together PhD students from various disciplines. I think we still have some work to do with that, but kind of the topic of neuroethics isn't just neuroscience and biomedical engineering, but legal aspects, philosophical aspects. So we've been really trying since we started to recruit like philosophy PhD students and law students to really kind of get these different perspectives. I mean, I think a lot of the ethical ideas are kind of framed in ways that we don't really think about in the same way as scientists. So we're really trying to also bring together many different people across disciplines to talk about these topics too.
In that interdisciplinary search of having better communication about neuroethics, was there anything that kind of came out of left field for you from a different discipline, something that you hadn't thought about, but it's now still lingering in your mind?
I mean, for me personally, it always happens when there's a new field. So we had the great privilege of speaking with Dr. Christopher Robertson. He's a law professor here at BU in the public health and law department. And he had some incredibly interesting insights into drug approvals for treating Alzheimer's disease and the politics behind it and the full story of why it was eventually pulled from the market. A lot of that stuff you do not learn from a science background. We learn about the technology, we learn about the research behind it, but some of the legality and the politics and the reasons that they went down the path they did were really striking to me.
Yeah, another example that comes to mind is we had Dr. Danielle Friend speak to us, and she used to be, she's worked for the FDA, and she talked a lot about the kind of various steps that go into getting drugs approved for clinical trials and everything, and just learning a lot about the like financial aspect of submitting an application to get your drug tested and the various non-scientific parts of that process that really limit drugs from getting to the market. Yeah, again, that's things you don't learn when you're learning about the science of technology. It's very much outside of what we often read, but it's, that's what gets drugs to the market or not. So it's really, an essential thing to learn, but you don't really get exposed to that unless you talk to these sorts of people.
One more question about the BU's Neuroethics Committee itself. How big is the committee? How many students are involved in this? What specific rules and activities do you do other than the guest seminar series from the other universities or professors at BU? So what other fun activities? Anything you want to expand more on that?
Yeah, I think there's about 7 or 8 of us like as an organizing committee, but I think generally we have like over 20 people consistently coming to our events. And besides the seminar speakers, that's pretty much our main event that we hold consistently. We've also had more informal kind of journal clubs type events where people can talk about their own research and we talk about the ethics of that. Or, for example, a few weeks ago, we talked about the changes to the federal funding landscape. Yeah, I think we have had and are trying to have more of these more informal sessions where those that come to our events can maybe feel free to talk more about various topics they're interested in. And I think what I really like doing is like we sometimes have had movie or show viewing sessions of like Black Mirror or other kind of futuristic but neuroscience related media, and just we usually honestly don't even talk about the ethics of that too much, but it's more just to like, I think we're all interested in that and it's just fun to watch, but still has ethical considerations too.
Do you have plans on expanding? Because neuroethics is really, for anyone studying neuroscience or in any of the related disciplines, it's something that everyone, I think, should be thinking about and talking about and having a conversation about. Are there plans on expanding for more events or anything? Like, where is the organization going?
Yeah, I think one thing we're interested in expanding towards is maybe getting involved with the symposium every year, the Neurophotonics Symposium. I think we'll probably try to help organize that in future years, just so we can have an ethics component to that. Like you said, I think I agree. I think everyone should be at least a little bit interested in neuroethics. I think we're just trying to engage more with the community, right? We'd love to have more BME neuroscience students, as well as the students that are slightly underrepresented, like the law students and philosophy students, because it's all under the same umbrella, and we really are able to expand both of our worlds together. If you come from a neurotech background, you can learn more about philosophy. If you come from philosophy, you can learn more about neurotech.
Yeah, I think we've also mostly just had grad students attend these events, but I think we've kind of thrown out the idea of inviting undergrads or postdocs to attend, because obviously neuroethics is not just for grad students; it's all of science is related to that. So I think also expanding the people in other ways that can take things out of these events.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I hope after people watch this podcast or listen to this podcast, they can be more interested. And we'll talk a little later about where they can reach out to you too. I think we can start moving in towards the more rapid fire question and answer type section of the podcast. Basically, we're just going to throw out some questions. You can answer us with relatively shorter answers, anything that comes to your mind right then and there.
Yeah, okay. So coming back to the ChatGPT one, if AI ever becomes intelligent, whatever intelligent means, you can choose to define that very shortly. What kind of duty would we have as neuroscientists and engineers to keep in line with neuroethics?
I think personally, I believe that generative AI is pretty far off. But if it were to come to be, when it comes to be, I think we definitely have just a tremendous amount of ethical problems with it, ethical issues that would arise. I think we would have to approach that extremely cautiously. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I agree. I think just err on the side of caution with like making sure you are open if you do use it. I guess the thing that comes to mind is like using it for manuscripts in science. Like there's already kind of been lots of, probably all journals at this point have a clause of like, if you do use this, you have to like explain how you used it, or you can't use it. So yeah, I think err on the side of caution with using it would be good.
That's a great answer. It was a difficult question, but spot on.
Yeah, difficult question to start off with, but something related to that, you mentioned stuff like Black Mirror, this kind of sci-fi media that has to do with neuroscience. Is there one that specifically stands out to you as a really interesting example of the dilemmas one can face while looking at neuroethics?
I just finished watching Severance the other day. So, I mean, I think actually there was a recent article from BU that interviewed Dr. Steve Ramirez here, who does a lot of memory research. And I think they were like posing the question of, can severance actually happen in real life? I think his take was maybe. But I think a lot of ethical considerations come up with like separating your memories and kind of creating these different personalities almost, and how do you manage that when it's actually the same person but they have these different experiences. It's a crazy show. I don't know if that could ever happen in real life, but it definitely has a lot of implications of how do you handle that sort of technology.
One awesome movie that comes to mind that actually isn't super neurotech related, but it's super ethical related. It's just one that came to mind that I watched years ago was Gattaca. I love Gattaca, and I love how it just so simply brought up these massive ethical questions of our genetics and how much we can kind of play God with genetics. That's kind of set me on a path of being interested in ethics.
I see. I haven't watched that movie. I'll definitely watch it now.
Gattaca's very good.
They show it in a lot of biology classes, to be honest. Like it's that powerful. But I loved it. I watched it years ago.
All right. Adding that to the list for sure. All right. One fun question. So for both of you, outside of the research, are there any book, podcasts, hobbies that inspire you to keep going, keeps you curious, science, or in general life?
Yeah. Fun question. I really like hiking and staying active. I don't know, that wasn't a fun answer, but I don't know. I think doing non-science things like hiking and being in nature, I think it's a great time to like separate your mental like stress and everything from your personal life. I don't know. That's one of the things I like doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I like playing sports, and I just think it's fun. Every now and then I'll catch myself thinking about the motor processes that are going on in my cortex and basal ganglia. And I just think to myself, this is great that I can study something that's so impactful to my life and to everyone's. It's just kind of fun.
I want to change my answer. I thought something that
sleep.
No, not sleep.
What do you mean, please do?
You hated my answer. One thing I've been like getting more into is movies, like not just watching them, but like thinking about how they're made. I think I've been nerding out about it a bit because I feel like it does relate a lot to neuroscience and like the ways that you image things. So it's been cool to like think about science in like a hobby sort of way. I don't know. And then you can also watch a movie while you do that. So
yeah. Actually, a very similar question to that, and you kind of touched on it, is in your everyday life outside of research, are there times where these kinds of neuroethics questions kind of just pop in and kind of consume you a little bit?
One thing that I've been thinking a lot about is just like how often we use technology and how it has really like changed our brains. So there's like I forgot the name of the book, but I read a book that was just talking about how like phones and laptops have really actually changed our ability to attend to things, and like our attention spans have gotten like quantitatively extremely short. Yeah, just how things we use every single day, like of our life, is actually changing our brain chemistry. And whenever I think about that, I'm like, I should probably not use my phone so much, and maybe I'll put my phone in my room and not look at it for 2 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I'm also thinking a lot about like brain states, because I've been reading a lot about brain states, and I catch myself thinking about how to improve my own brain state and like how I can, best be ready for the activity I'm about to do, whether that be like reading an article or going on a walk or playing sports. Like what does my brain need to be the most healthy? And I think a lot of us obviously would like our brains to be super healthy, but we don't really have a clear answer of what that means day in and day out.
Great. So next question for you. If you would like to have a conversation with neuroscientists from history, any neuroscientist, who would it be and why?
This
Do you have a good answer?
might be controversial, maybe not neuroscientist, but I feel like Freud is like,
You can call him neuroscience, psychological neuroscience.
yeah, adjacent to neuroscience for sure. I don't know. I think we pretty much agree that his theories and whatnot are pretty, maybe not what we believe today. And a lot of the practices he had were not the best and quite controversial. But I don't know. I think it's interesting how he kind of was one of the first to start this whole wave of like thinking about the brain and how it actually impacts us more. And I guess studying sleep, I guess thinking about dreams is also something that's like kind of even today, like a really hard topic to study in science. And I don't know if I believe his theories on dreams, but I think he's an interesting person to talk about these like hard to understand concepts.
Yeah. So going forward, there's I'm sure a good population of our audience would be people who are aspiring PhD students or people who are looking to go into neuroscience. Are there any advices you would like to give them in terms of kind of making sure that their study design is ethical, or how they can be more aware of these problems that could pop up in their studies?
Yeah, I mean, I think for human research, when you're thinking about your study question, thinking about, if it's related to a disorder or whatnot, which sort of populations are most affected by it, or what populations have certain differences in physiology that might actually change how you study it. That'll help a lot just in designing your studies. And then also I think just creating a plan of how you want to recruit your subjects and thinking about, am I actually recruiting a sample that's representative of the entire population? And doing that early on, I think in your study design is the best way to like try and ensure that's what happens. At least for human subjects, you have to get everything approved by the institutional review board. So there's at least like a baseline of ethical, things to consider there. But yeah, I think those kind of cover the basics. Yeah.
Yeah, and for animal research, you really want to think about what your model can give you, right? You want to use your model to the best of your ability. You want to glean information that's useful for the field and useful for your career. And I guess on the neuroethics side, you just want to ensure that you're maximizing every single animal that you're using, because you want to treat those animals with respect, right? They are worth giving a lot of thought towards and worth reducing their suffering as much as possible and maximizing their benefit towards your research. So just show your question to as many people as possible and get advice from a number of professors and people that have been doing it before you.
That's amazing advice. Thank you.
All right. So this might be another tough question, but feel free to use your creative imagination. It could be anything. So what's one scientific question you'd love to see answered in your lifetime if you had to pick one?
That's a really good question. I would love, this is very neuroethics, and we haven't touched on this very much, but I would love to see maybe not an answer, but more treatments of mental health and mental health issues. I think that there's a lot that in my lifetime will start to understand why people suffer so much and fully internally, fully in their brain. I really would like to see answers to why that is, how we can help these individuals, how we can help ourselves, and just improve the mental health of our society.
That's a wonderful answer. That's one of my topic of interest as well, and very much agree. Hopefully in future, in, 10, 15 years. I mean, looking back at past 15 years, we are much better spot already in terms of mental health awareness. And then a lot of the research is going in that direction to bring about pharmacological, invasive and non-invasive modalities to understand and treat those kinds of conditions. So hopefully in the next few years, we'll see more progress in that.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of related to this, but it's not going to sound related at first. But I think the question of like, why do we sleep? It seems like a very basic question, but we still really have no grasp on like the real importance of sleep and why we do it. And I guess kind of in relation to mental illness, sleep is something that changes across like disorders and various mental illnesses. So it's a core feature of our brain. We do it for so much of our life. So I think if we can get better answers on why we sleep, that could also be really important for treating various disorders and even like Alzheimer's or even healthy aging, where sleep also changes, can maybe be informative to treating those various things too.
Awesome. All right. So thank you so much for being on this podcast. I would like to give you the opportunity to say basically like, what is, in one sentence, what is neuroethics about? What is it for? Especially if it's something that we haven't touched on during our discussion today.
Battery cut out, so we have more time to think. But
I guess neuroethics for me just means the space to discuss the various issues of the science we do and how it can impact people, making sure that we consider everything that goes into delivering a device or treatment or something else to a human.
For me, I'll say neuroethics is another way to study the brain holistically. I'll leave it at that.
Nice.
Damn.
That was profound.
That was beautiful. Yeah, with that, we would like to thank you for participating in this podcast. As the audience and the listeners should know, this was the first student-led organization representatives we had on this podcast. And honestly, I think we could not have asked for a better representation of a student-led organization here at the Neurophotonics Center. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. It was great.
Thank you. This was fun.
Okay, finally, where can people follow your work? Is there any email address or LinkedIn that you want to share?
Yeah, so right now we have just an email address. So it's buneuroethics@gmail.com. And soon we'll have more social media presence. So we'll link that below.
Awesome.
All right, thank you very much for joining us here for a wonderful discussion, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you like this episode and want more like it, please take a moment to share it with anyone you think would enjoy it too. Next time, we will be joined by Dr. Irving Biggio from Boston University as we discuss his academic journey that has led to his fascination with the properties of light interaction with materials in the brain, the physics of light and how we can take advantage of it for neuro research, and the very beautiful images we can get from birefringence microscopy. This episode was made possible by the support of Boston University's Neurophotonics Center and listeners like you. Thank you.